Hey gang! So we are studying Mendelian genetics, which means the kind of genetics that Gregor Mendel discovered. The word genetics means the study of traits passing from one generation to the next. So this is the kind of stuff that you see passing on from parent to kid. And basically that's everything that we are. We're just made up of traits. Lots and lots of different traits. So genetics is studying how those things move from parent to child. Mendel studied pea plants, and here's some of the traits that he studied. So he picked things that had just two possible varieties, or we call them phenotypes. So for plant height, there was either a tall plant or a short plant. There weren't any in-betweens. There were round seeds or wrinkled seeds. There were yellow seeds or green seeds. So by looking at how these passed from the parent plant to the child plant, he found out a lot of cool stuff. So like I said, each of those traits Mendel was looking at, they had two different forms, and the plant would either have one or the other. And so these different forms of a particular gene are called alleles. That's an important word to know. So for example, the gene that controls flower color has two different alleles. There is an allele that makes a purple flower, and there's an allele that makes a white flower. So these are the same gene. The gene controls flower color, but the alleles are slightly different so that we see them as two different types of plants. Here's an example of a cross that Mendel did. When I say cross, I mean he took a mommy plant and a daddy plant and made some seeds that could grow baby plants. So he started with two parents that were true breeding, meaning they always had offspring with identical traits to the parents. So this came from a line of all purple plants, and this one came from a line of all white plants. He mixed a purple with a white, and then the babies, or the new plants that grew from the seeds, were all purple. This is a hybrid. Hybrid means the offspring between two different parents. So one purple parent, one white parent gives you a hybrid. Instead of half and half, we see that it was all purple. And then if Mendel bred two of these hybrids together and looked at the next generation of plants, they always came out mostly purple, but some whites. And it was always in this ratio of 3 purples for every 1 white plant, which he thought was really weird. We'll find out why pretty soon. So one of the cool things that he discovered, he named the principle of dominance, and that's that some alleles are dominant and others are recessive. So what we mean by dominant is that it always kind of takes over, it takes charge, and that's the one that you see. So an organism with at least one dominant allele is going to have that dominant trait. An organism with a recessive allele will only show the recessive trait if the dominant one isn't there. Now, we always get one allele from mom and one allele from dad. So, sorry, my picture's kind of covering this up. Let me move over here. Ta-da! Okay. So if it got one purple allele from mom and one purple allele from dad, it's going to be a purple flower. If it got one white allele from mom and one white allele from dad, then it's going to have that recessive color of white. So we found out purple took over the white in that first generation and most of the second generation, so purple's dominant. And we definitely see that here. If you have one purple allele, say it's from mom, and one white allele from dad, you're still going to end up purple because purple is the dominant allele. It's always going to show up over the other one. So whenever we find a dominant allele, it's going to be a capital letter, and a recessive allele is going to be a lowercase letter. We're going to jump back over here. So let's look at traits in humans, which is much more interesting than peas. Let's look at maybe some traits that we see around our classroom. So some common ones are ears. So you either have a free earlobe where it kind of goes down before it goes back up, or an attached ear where it just goes up and at them. The free or detached ear is dominant. If you have hair on your fingers, that's dominant. A few people don't have any hair on their fingers. If you have a widow's peak, so that's shown right here where your hair kind of comes to a point. I don't have one. I have a straight hairline, but widow's peaks are dominant. And curly hair is dominant over straight hair, and curly hair would include wavy hair as well. And then cleft chin, that's shown here, or a butt chin, means you have like this little dimple in the middle. That's dominant. And a smooth chin, like mine, with no dimples, is recessive. So try to take a minute and figure out what you have, the dominant or the recessive trait for each of these. And then maybe go around and check out some of your classmates and see what traits you can find around the classroom. All right, so the other cool thing that Mendel figured out, he called segregation. And that means that when a parent is forming gametes, which would be eggs for females or sperm for males, the alleles for each gene are going to segregate or separate from each other, so that when it makes a gamete, it's got only one allele for each gene. So in this mama pea, she got one allele from mom and one allele from dad, so she's got two alleles for every gene. They might be the same allele or they might be different, but she's got two of everything. When she makes gametes, her egg cells, she's only going to put one allele for each gene into the gametes. And that's really important because this gamete needs to fuse with a gamete from dad to make a baby. So dad also has two alleles for every gene. In this example, he's got two recessive alleles. He's going to segregate those. They're going to split apart. So only one allele, and we never know which one it's going to be, is going to end up in his sperm, in his gamete. So then those two gametes fuse to make a baby pea plant. And so now this baby also has two alleles, one from mom, one from dad. So the segregation is important. If we didn't split up the alleles just randomly, then the babies would get maybe like all of their maternal grandmother's genes and none of the grandpa's genes. So with segregation, those genes get mixed up and randomized, which is good. You get some variety. All right, some important vocab to be aware of. Homozygous. Homo means same. So homozygous means having two identical alleles for a gene. So that would be if we see two dominants or two recessives. Heterozygous. Hetero means different. So heterozygous means having two different alleles for a gene. So that's one dominant and one recessive. Your genotype is your exact genetic makeup. So that tells exactly what alleles you have. So these are all genotypes. Big T, little t, or big T and little t together. Whatever you have, whatever mix of alleles you have is your genotype. Phenotype means the physical traits that you have. So that's kind of like what trait do you see. So generally it's going to be either the dominant trait. If you have either this genotype or this genotype, you're going to have the dominant phenotype. Or if you have this genotype, you have the recessive phenotype. So this would be, for instance, if this was for tall versus short plants. So the dominant allele is tall. So if this is your genotype, then your phenotype is tall. If this is your genotype, then your phenotype is tall. And if this was your genotype, your phenotype is short. All right, so some practice in Punnett squares. I know you guys have done this before, so hopefully you remember a little bit how to do this. Always start with the parents. So one parent's possible gametes goes on the top. So one allele for each column, right? Because you always have two alleles for every gamete, but when you're going to make, or two alleles for every gene, sorry. When you make your gametes, you just put one allele into each of those, and you never know which one it's going to be. So one allele would go here, one allele would go here. The other parent's possible gametes go here, so one allele here, and one allele here. And then you're going to figure out the possible offspring by mixing. So whatever the parent's allele was here, you're going to put that in this square along with whatever this parent's allele was here. So you have two alleles now in the middle square because that's what the baby is possibly going to have. And this doesn't tell you what the baby will be. A Punnett square predicts the possible outcome of a cross. So you'll end up with these 4 squares. Each one's going to have 2 alleles now together, and that's going to tell you all the possible genotypes of children of the 2 parents. So we're going to do a lot of practice with these in the worksheet. And you can also get crazy and do 2 genes and look at what the combinations of both genes would be. So in this case, you start with the parents, figure out what the gametes are going to be. If there's 2 different genes with 4 different alleles, you've got to find all the possible combinations. So each gamete, which you're going to put in one in each column, is going to have one of the round alleles and one of the green alleles. So this is for round or wrinkled peas and green or yellow peas, I think. So one allele for the gene that controls the shape of the pea, plus one allele for the gene that covers the color of the pea. So for instance, you would have maybe big R with a little y, and that would go in this column. And then big R could go with the second little y in this column. So it's kind of like the FOIL method in math. First, outer, inner, and then last, if that makes sense. So we got this first allele with both of these, and then for this column we would do little r with little y here, and then little r with the other little y over here. So you get your 4 possible gametes. Each one has one allele from each of the genes you're looking at. So sorry if that's a lot right now. We'll take it slow in the practice. All right, for your first practice Punnett squares, you are going to select a celebrity mother and father and find out what traits their children might possibly have. And to keep it simple, I've made them all homozygous, right? They have the same allele for each gene, and that's just going to make it a lot easier on everybody. Let's see, can I move out of the way? Sorry, I'll have to move up to their faces. So pick one of these 3 females, and you can pause me and then write down on your worksheet the different traits. So for instance, if you picked Taylor, you'd write down mom is Taylor Swift. Her genotype for earlobes, EE. WW, you're going to write down these genotypes for the traits. So go ahead and pause if you need to. And then when you're ready, move on to the males. So pick one celebrity father and write down his genotype for all of the different traits. And then you're going to make Punnett squares to see what baby's possibly will get from these two crosses.